Creating a web browser with Flutter in 9 simple steps, a step-by-step guide. Let's go.
In a realm of code and creative flair, Flutter's magic we shall now share. A web browser, sleek and refined. With Flutter's power, we shall bind. Step 1 begins our coding quest. Set up the project, be our best. Dependencies added, they unite. Web view and share, shining bright. Step 2 brings the UI to life. An app bar, a web view in strife. With icons adorned, they take their place, bringing elegance and user interface grace. Step 3 unlocks navigation's door. History's journey, let's explore. Web pages loaded, URLs in sight. A journey through the digital light. Step 4 integrates the navigation's play. Back and forward, the buttons convey. App bar adorned with buttons grand, guiding us through the web's vast land. Step 5, bookmarking, a feature profound. Saving pages, like treasures found. Bookmark names and URLs combined. A digital library we'll surely find. Step 6 sees the integration true. A bookmark icon, a tap will do. Bookmarking the page, a simple feat, making our browsing experience complete. Step 7 brings history into view. A separate page, where it's due. Listed entries, a timeline unfurled, reliving the journey across the web's world. Step 8 integrates history's embrace. A button in the app bar, finding its place. Tapping it reveals the web's past. A journey through time, oh so vast. Step 9, the final touch we bring. Timestamps added, history will sing. A completed browser, elegant and neat. 9 simple steps, a web browser feat. With Flutter's grace and coding divine. A web browser created, a masterpiece defined. So code away, with Flutter's might. Create your browser, shining bright.
Part 1. Welcome to the audio guide on how to build a Flutter browser application with features like navigation, bookmarking, history, and sharing. Let's get started. Step 1. Setting up the project. To begin, create a new Flutter project and set up the necessary dependencies. Open your terminal and use the following command to create a new project. !Flutter create browser _app . Next, navigate into the project directory. !cd browser _app . Open the !pubspec YAML file and add the required dependencies. You'll need the !webview _flutter package for displaying web content and the !share package for sharing functionality. Update the dependencies section as follows. YAML, dependencies, Flutter, SDK, Flutter, WebView _Flutter, caret 2.2.0, share, caret 2.0.4, !. Save the file and run the following command to fetch the new dependencies. !Flutter pub get !. Now that the project is set up, we can proceed to the next step. Part 2. Step 2. Implementing the user interface. In this step, we'll create the user interface for our browser application. Open the /lib/main.dart file and replace the existing code with the following. !dart. Import package. Flutter/material.dart. Import package. WebView _Flutter /webview _Flutter.dart. Import package. Share/share.dart. Void main equals greater than run app, browser app. Class browser app extends stateless widget. Add override. Widget build context. Return material app. Title, browser, theme data, primary swatch, colors, blue, closing parenthesis comma, home, browser page, closing parenthesis semicolon, closing curly bracket, class browser page extends stateful widget. Add override. _browser page state create state equals greater than _browser page state. Closing curly bracket. Class _browser page state extends state less than browser page greater than. Final global key less than scaffold state greater than _scaffold key equals global key less than scaffold state greater than. Final _webview key equals unique key. WebView controller _webview controller. String _URL equals https://www.google.com. Add override. Widget build context. Return scaffold. Key. Underscore scaffold key. App bar. App bar. Title. Text. Browser. Actions. Icon button. Icon. Icon. Icons. Share. On pressed. Share website. Underscore URL. Closing curly bracket comma. Closing parenthesis comma. Closing square bracket comma. Closing parenthesis comma. Body. Web view. Key. Underscore web view key. Initial URL. Underscore URL. JavaScript mode. JavaScript mode. Unrestricted. On web view created. Controller. Underscore web view controller equals controller. Closing curly bracket comma. Closing parenthesis comma. Closing parenthesis semicolon. Closing curly bracket. Void share website. String URL. Share. Share. URL. Closing curly bracket. Closing curly bracket. Backquote backquote backquote. In this code, we define the backquote browser app backquote and backquote browser page backquote classes. The backquote browser app backquote class is a backquote stateless widget backquote representing the main app, while the backquote browser page backquote class is a backquote stateful widget backquote representing the main page of our browser application. The user interface consists of a backquote scaffold backquote widget within backquote app bar backquote at the top. We include an action in the backquote app bar backquote using an backquote icon button backquote to trigger the sharing functionality. Inside the backquote body backquote of the backquote scaffold backquote, we place a backquote web view backquote widget to display the web content. We also define the backquote share website backquote function to handle sharing the current website URL. The backquote share backquote method from the backquote share backquote package is used to open the share dialog. Now that we have the basic user interface in place, let's move on to the next step. Part 3. Step 3. Adding navigation and history. In this step, we'll add navigation functionality and a history feature to our browser application. Inside the backquote underscore browser page state backquote class, add the following code. Backquote 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 dart. List less than history entry greater than history equals. Add override. Void init state. Super. Init state. History.add. History entry. Title. Home. URL. Underscore URL. Closing curly bracket. Void navigate to URL. String URL. Set state. Underscore URL equals URL. History.add. History entry. Title. Loading. URL. URL. Closing curly bracket closing parenthesis semicolon. Underscore web view controller. Load URL. URL. Closing curly bracket. Void navigate back. If. History. Length greater than 1. Set state. History. Remove last. Underscore URL equals history. Last.url. Closing curly bracket closing parenthesis semicolon. Underscore web view controller. Load URL. Underscore URL. Closing curly bracket. Closing curly bracket. Void navigate forward. Implement the forward navigation functionality here. Closing curly bracket. Backquote backquote backquote. In this code, we define a backquote history backquote list to keep track of the visited URLs. When the app starts, we add a default home entry to the history. We create 3 functions: backquote navigate to URL backquote, backquote navigate back backquote, and backquote navigate forward backquote. The backquote navigate to URL backquote function is called when a user types a URL or selects a link. It updates the backquote underscore URL backquote and adds a new history entry. The backquote navigate back backquote function is triggered when the user taps the back button, removing the current entry from the history and loading the previous URL. The backquote navigate forward backquote function can be implemented similarly to handle forward navigation. Now, let's integrate these functions into the user interface. Next 2500 characters block part. Part 4. Step 4. Integrating navigation and history. Inside the backquote underscore browser page state backquote class, modify the backquote build backquote method as follows. Backquote 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 dart. Add override. Widget build context. Return scaffold. Key. Underscore scaffold key. app bar, title, text, browser, actions, icon button, icons, share, on pressed, share website, _URL, closing curly bracket comma, closing parenthesis comma, icon button, icons, arrow _back, on pressed, navigate back, closing parenthesis comma, icon button, icons, arrow _forward, on pressed, navigate forward, closing parenthesis comma, closing square bracket comma, closing parenthesis comma, body, web view, key, web view key, initial URL, URL, JavaScript mode, unrestricted, on web view created, controller, web view controller equals controller, closing curly bracket comma, on page started, URL, set state, URL equals URL, history.add, history entry, title, loading, URL, closing curly bracket closing parenthesis semicolon, closing curly bracket comma, on page finished, URL, set state, URL equals URL, history, last, title equals URL, closing curly bracket closing parenthesis semicolon, closing curly bracket comma, closing parenthesis comma, closing parenthesis semicolon, closing curly bracket, backquote. Now, the backquote app bar backquote contains additional backquote icon button backquote widgets for back and forward navigation. We assign the backquote navigate back backquote and backquote navigate forward backquote functions as the backquote on pressed backquote callbacks for the respective buttons. Inside the backquote web view backquote widget, we handle the backquote on page started backquote and backquote on page finished backquote events to update the backquote _URL backquote and the title of the last history entry accordingly. With these modifications, the back and forward navigation buttons will now function as expected, and the history will be updated as the user navigates through different web pages. Great progress so far. Let's move on to the next step. Part 5. Step 5. Implementing bookmarking. In this step, we'll add bookmarking functionality to our browser application. First, let's create a new class called bookmark to represent a bookmark entry. Inside the _browser page state class, add the following code. Dart, class bookmark, final string name, final string URL, bookmark, required this.name, required this.url, closing curly bracket, list less than bookmark greater than bookmarks equals, void bookmark current page, show dialog, context, builder, build context, string bookmark name equals, return alert dialog, title, text, bookmark current page, content, text field, unchanged, value, bookmark name equals value, closing curly bracket comma, decoration, input decoration, hint text, enter bookmark name, closing parenthesis comma, actions, text button, on pressed, navigator, of, context, pop, closing curly bracket comma, child, text, cancel, closing parenthesis comma, text button, on pressed, set state, bookmarks.add, bookmark, name, URL, _URL, closing curly bracket closing parenthesis semicolon, navigator, of, context, pop, closing curly bracket comma, child, text, save, closing parenthesis comma, closing square bracket comma, closing parenthesis semicolon, closing curly bracket comma, closing parenthesis semicolon, closing curly bracket, backquote. In this code, we define the bookmark class to hold the name and URL of a bookmark. We also create a bookmarks list to store all the bookmarked pages. The bookmark current page function displays a dialog that prompts the user to enter a bookmark name. Upon saving, a new bookmark instance is created and added to the bookmarks list. Now, let's integrate the bookmarking functionality into the user interface.
Part 6. Step 6. Integrating bookmarking. Inside the build method of the _browser page state class, modify the app bar as follows. Dart, app bar, title, text, browser, actions, icon button, icons, share, on pressed, share website, _URL, closing curly bracket comma, closing parenthesis comma, icon button, icons, bookmark, on pressed, bookmark current page, closing parenthesis comma, icon button, icons, arrow _back, on pressed, navigate back, closing parenthesis comma, icon button, icons, arrow _forward, on pressed, navigate forward, closing parenthesis comma, closing square bracket comma, closing parenthesis comma, backquote. Now, the app bar contains an additional icon button widget for bookmarking the current page. We assign the bookmark current page function as the on pressed callback for this button. With these modifications, you can now bookmark the current page by tapping the bookmark icon in the app bar. Fantastic progress so far. Let's move on to the next step. Part 7. Step 7. Viewing the history. In this step, we'll add the functionality to view the browsing history. Create a new file called history _page. Dart and add the following code. Dart. Import package. Flutter/material.dart. Import browser _page. Dart. Class history page extends stateless widget. Final list less than history entry greater than history. History page. Required this. History. Add override. Widget build context. Return scaffold. App bar. Title. Text. History. Closing parenthesis comma. Body. List view. Builder. Item count. History. Length. Item builder. Context. Index. Return list tile. Title. Text. History. Index. Title. Subtitle. Text. History. Index.url. On tap. Navigator. Push. Context. Material page root. Builder. Context. Equals greater than browser page. URL. History. Index.url. Closing parenthesis comma. Closing parenthesis semicolon. Closing curly bracket comma. Closing parenthesis semicolon. Closing curly bracket comma. Closing parenthesis comma. Closing parenthesis semicolon. Closing curly bracket. Closing curly bracket. Backquote. In this code, we define the history page widget, which displays the browsing history entries. The history list is passed as a parameter to the widget. We create a list view. Builder to dynamically render the history entries as list tile widgets. Tapping on a history entry will navigate to the corresponding web page. Now, let's integrate the history functionality into the user interface. Part 8. Step 8. Integrating history viewing. Inside the browser page state class, add the following function. Dart. Void show history. Navigator. Push. Context. Material page root. Builder. Context. Equals greater than history page. History. Closing parenthesis comma. Closing parenthesis semicolon. Closing curly bracket. Backquote. This function is called when the user taps on the history icon in the app bar. It navigates to the history page widget, passing the history list as a parameter. Next, modify the app bar inside the build method. Dart. App bar. Title. Text. Browser. Actions. Icon button. Icon. Icon. Icons. Share. On pressed. Share website. _ URL. Closing curly bracket comma. Closing parenthesis comma. Icon button. Icon. Icon. Icons. Bookmark. On pressed. Bookmark current page. Closing parenthesis comma. Icon button. Icon. Icon. Icons. History. On pressed. Show history. Closing parenthesis comma. Icon button. Icon. Icon. Icons. Arrow _ back. On pressed. Navigate back. Closing parenthesis comma. Icon button. Icon. Icon. Icons. Arrow _ forward. On pressed. Navigate forward. Closing parenthesis comma. Closing square bracket comma. Closing parenthesis comma. Backquote backquote backquote. Now, the backquote app bar backquote contains an additional backquote icon button backquote widget for viewing the browsing history. We assign the backquote show history backquote function as the backquote on pressed backquote callback for this button. With these modifications, you can now view the browsing history by tapping the history icon in the app bar. Excellent job! You've successfully integrated the features of navigation, bookmarking, and history into your Flutter browser application. Let's move on to the final step. Part 9. Step 9. Finalizing the application. In this step, we'll add some final touches to our browser application. First, let's update the backquote history entry backquote class by adding a timestamp property. Backquote 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 dart. Class history entry. Final string title. Final string URL. Final datetime timestamp. History entry. Required this. Title. Required this.url. Required this. Timestamp. Closing curly bracket. Backquote backquote backquote. This timestamp will represent the time when a history entry is added. Next, let's modify the backquote on page finished backquote callback inside the backquote web view backquote widget. Backquote 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 dart. On page finished. URL. Set state. _URL equals URL. History. Last. Title equals _URL. History. Last. Timestamp equals datetime.now. Closing curly bracket closing parenthesis semicolon. Closing curly bracket comma. Backquote backquote backquote. By updating the backquote timestamp backquote property of the last history entry, we ensure that it reflects the time when the page finished loading. Finally, let's make a small adjustment to the backquote show history backquote function. Backquote 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 dart. Void show history. Navigator. Push. Context. Material page root. Builder. Context. Equals greater than history page. History. History. Reversed. Tollist. Closing parenthesis comma. Closing parenthesis semicolon. Closing curly bracket. Backquote backquote backquote. By calling backquote reversed. Tollist. Backquote on the backquote history backquote list. We display the most recent history entries at the top of the list. That's it. You've completed the implementation of the Flutter browser application with navigation, bookmarking, history, and sharing features. Feel free to enhance the app further by customizing the UI or adding additional functionalities. Congratulations on your achievement. Happy browsing with your new Flutter browser app. This concludes the audio guide.